Let's look at the cerebral white matter. The cerebral white matter is the inner or the deeper region of the cerebrum hemisphere. It forms the bulk of the inner mass of the cerebrum hemisphere. This is the configuration of the cerebrum hemisphere. The dotted terminal region is the gray matter region, while the inner whitish region is the cerebral white matter region. What is this region made up of? We've talked about the cerebral cortex. We said that the cerebral cortex is made up of the cell body of the neurons deposited around this terminal edge, and that is why we have the gray coloration. So within the central white matter region, the bulk of what we have there are the nerve fibers. And this is the way the neuron is placed. We have the cell body region placed towards the terminal edge, and this tends to form the gray matter region of the cerebrum hemisphere. While the axon, wrapped with myelin sheath, is located within the cerebrum white matter region. If you check up our lecture on the neuron, we've described in details where we have this white coloration around this axon because of the formation of the myelin sheath that is formed by the Schwann cell along the length of the axon. You can go and check up that lecture to upgrade your knowledge. Also, we have glial cells, which are neural supporting cells. The major ones that we have in this region are the Schwann cell, and of course, this is understandable because it is the Schwann cell that is responsible for the formation of the myelin sheath. We also have oligodendrocytes as one of the neural supporting cells within this region. So let's quickly look at the gray versus the white matter. We've talked about the cerebral cortex in our previous lecture. You can also go and check up that. But comparing the two, we know that the gray matter is the outer gray region of the cerebrum hemisphere, and we know that the white matter is the central white matter region of the cerebrum hemisphere. Going further to distinguish them, now we already know that the gray matter is mainly formed by the neural cell bodies. The white matter region is mainly formed by the nerve fibers. And also, talking about the color differences, we know that the gray matter is gray in color, while the white matter, as the name implies, is whitish in color. And by now, we should also know what is responsible for this. That is why when you take a slice of the brain, you open it up, you see that within the central part, you see a whitish presentation at the center, while at the terminal head, you see grayish deposition. The gray matter is responsible for processing neural information. And as this neural information are being processed around the neural cell body, they are needed to be communicated to different regions for synchronization to take place. So what the white matter does is to communicate the neural impulse from one region to another. And if you look at the morphology of the structure that is seen within the white matter region, you see that it is the axonic region of the neurons that are embedded within the white matter region. And of course, this is able to justify the reason why there's going to be movement to and fro the different regions of the brain, because they are already creating the platform for that to exist. If you look at the structure of the myelin sheath and the formation of the node of Ranvier, where neural impulses are able to jump so that they can run through the axon with the speed of light. So all these formations are already programmed for these activities to take place, to communicate neural signal from one region of the brain to the other. So going back to our cerebral white matter, we already know that in this region, we have collection of tracts, which is also called nerve fibers. The pattern by which they run to and fro the different regions of the brain are specific. They do not just run as they want. So we classify the tract that is seen within the cerebral white matter into different types of tract. The first one will be the commissural tract, and this is the commissural tract. And what the commissural tract does basically is to connect the two cerebrum hemisphere. This is the cerebrum hemisphere, this is the midbrain, this is the pons, the medulla, and this is the spinal cord. So any tract from one cerebrum hemisphere to the other, thereby connecting them together, is called the commissural tract. Then the next one is the association tract. The association tract are seen in just one cerebrum hemisphere, and this is the association tract. So you see them connecting one region of the cerebrum hemisphere to the other. It does not extend to the other cerebrum hemisphere like we have in the commissural tract. It is just seen within each cerebrum hemisphere, although connecting one region of the cerebrum hemisphere to the other. Then the last one is the projection tract, from the name projection. So they connect higher center of the brain to the lower center of the brain. So what this does is that they connect a specific region within the cerebrum hemisphere, and they connect it to the lower part of the brain, which could either be regions in the brainstem or even can extend as far as the spinal cord. So these are the three classes of the pattern of the tract that forms the cerebral white matter. So we are going to be taking these tracts one after the other to see the different types that we have, and also to see specific region of the brain where they connect to and fro. So let's look at the commissural fiber. The commissural fiber, we've said that it connects one cerebrum hemisphere to the other. So it connects specific region in one cerebrum hemisphere to the other cerebrum hemisphere. The biggest commissural fiber in the brain is the corpus callosum, and this is the corpus callosum. And that is why when you take the entire brain is lined at the midline by median longitudinal fixture. So when you try to open the two cerebrum hemisphere, you see that there's still a structure holding it within. You cannot easily separate the two cerebrum hemisphere from each other because they are connected at the midline by a very strong commissural tract that is called the corpus callosum. This is the largest commissural fiber, and it's good that we look at this critically. So the corpus callosum is about 10 cm in length, and the bulk of it is made up of about 200 to 300 millions of nerve fibers. So you can see the traffic of nerve fibers that is collected within this space to form the corpus callosum, connecting the two cerebrum hemispheres together. So going further on the corpus callosum, it's good for us to dive into it a bit. We've said that they connect the two cerebrum hemispheres together. And of course, we know that the cerebrum hemisphere have different regions. We have the frontal lobe of the cerebrum hemisphere, the parietal lobe, the occipital lobe, and of course, the temporal lobe. Each of these regions is what the corpus callosum connects from one cerebrum hemisphere to the other, except the temporal region. And we'll look into this as we go further. The corpus callosum is made up of different regions. Each of the region connects specific region of the cerebrum hemisphere to the other. So this is how it works. So we have the corpus callosum made up of the genu. The genu is like the curve that is seen around the anterior part of the corpus callosum. So this is the frontal lobe, and of course this will definitely be the anterior part, and this is the occipital, and this is the posterior part. So there is a curve or a bend that is seen around the corpus callosum in this frontal region, and that is called the genu. And what the genu connects is the frontal lobe of one cerebrum hemisphere to the other. So you see fibers running from this genu connecting the frontal lobe of one cerebrum hemisphere to the frontal lobe of the second cerebrum hemisphere. Then the next region is the rostrum. The rostrum is the region that is distal to the genu. After the genu, you have this region that connects the orbital region of the frontal lobe of one cerebrum hemisphere to the orbital region of the frontal lobe of the other cerebrum hemisphere. And this is the rostrum. Then next you have the body, and this is the body. The body is like the upper superior region of the corpus callosum. And fibers from this region radiate, connecting the superior surface of one cerebrum hemisphere to the other. Going a bit further, we have the splenius. The splenius is the largest region of the corpus callosum, and it is located in the posterior or around the occipital region. And what this connects is the occipital lobe of one cerebrum hemisphere to the other, and this is the splenius. Between the trunk or the body, between this region and the splenius, we have a constriction that is called the isthmus. Then also the trunk and the splenius form the tapetum that runs and hack over the lateral ventricle. Also, to add to our knowledge, we have specific names for fibers that radiate around the corpus callosum. So this is the corpus callosum. This is the cerebrum hemisphere. We already know that it connects one cerebrum hemisphere to the other. In the genu part, that's the anterior part or the frontal region, we have fibers that they connect the frontal lobe of one cerebrum hemisphere to the other. So these fibers is termed the forceps minor. Going further posteriorly, we have fibers radiating, also connecting the superior surface of one cerebrum hemisphere to the other, and that is referred to as the coronal radiator of the corpus callosum. And this is the coronal radiator of the corpus callosum. Then more posteriorly, we have the forceps major. The forceps major are fibers radiating around the splenius region, and they connect the occipital lobe of one cerebrum hemisphere to the other. These fibers are just given specific names depending on the region where they connect. Apart from the corpus callosum, we have smaller commissural tracts that connect different structures or regions within one cerebrum hemisphere to the other. And one of the structures that I would want to highlight is the anterior and posterior commissural tracts. Remember when we talked about the different regions where the corpus callosum connect, we said there are regions of the corpus callosum that connect the frontal lobe, the parietal lobe, and also the occipital lobe of one cerebrum hemisphere to the other. The region marked out is the temporal region. So it is one of the smaller commissural fibers that actually connects the temporal lobe of one cerebrum hemisphere to the other, and that's the anterior commissural fiber. So this is the anterior commissural fiber. Then we have another one posteriorly, the posterior commissural fiber. The posterior commissural fiber connects specific structures around the occipital lobe of one cerebrum hemisphere to the other. This is the pineal gland, and this is the stalk of the pineal gland. Along the lower stalk is where we have the posterior commissural fiber. We have the abenular commissure. From the name, they connect the abenular nucleus of one cerebrum hemisphere to the abenular nucleus of the other cerebrum hemisphere. The abenular nucleus is one of the nuclei of the diencephalon, and this is the abenular commissure. Then another smaller commissural tract that we have is the hippocampal commissure. It's also referred to as the commissure of the fornix, and this is the commissure of the fornix. We have the corpus callosum here, then distal to the corpus callosum, we have the fornix. The fornix is like a hack structure that is made up of bundles of white matter wrapped around the thalamus. So we have the thalamus around this region. The hippocampal commissure, from the name, connects the hippocampus of one cerebrum hemisphere to the hippocampus of the second cerebrum hemisphere. So if we try to extract this structure out, this is what we see. This is the fornix, and of course we know that the fornix has a body, the column, it has the fimbriae, and it's connected to the hippocampus. So you have the hippocampus somewhere around here, located deep to the temporal lobe. So you have it somewhere around this region, but you now have this hack structure connecting the hippocampus of one cerebrum hemisphere to the other, and they connect it through this space. This is where the commissure of the fornix is. This is where the commissural tract that connects the hippocampus of one cerebrum hemisphere to the other. Then the next set of fibers that we have that forms the bulk of the cerebral white matter is the association tract. The association tract, from the name, we already said that they are seen within one cerebrum hemisphere. They are not like the commissural tract that connects region from one cerebrum hemisphere to the other. These are seen just within one cerebrum hemisphere, and this is the entire configuration of the cerebrum hemisphere for one side. So we try to use this to study the different association fibers that are seen within the cerebrum hemisphere. So they are sub-classified into two. We have the short association fiber and we have the long association fiber. Short association fiber, from the name, it means they connect close region within the cerebrum hemisphere together. Remember, we have that gyra. So this is one gyrus, this is another gyrus. So the tract connecting one gyrus to the other is a typical example of a short association tract. And this is what they are referred to as the arcuate fasciculus. So this is where they are located. They connect just short distance of the cerebrum hemisphere. So the long association fibers, from the name, it means they connect distant region. That means their fibers would be long. It will not be as short as what we have in the short association fiber, because they connect short distances. So you expect that their fibers will be short, while these are longer because they connect distant region within each of the cerebrum hemisphere. Good example is the uncinate fasciculus. This is the uncinate fasciculus, connecting regions of the frontal lobe of one cerebrum hemisphere to the temporal lobe of the same cerebrum hemisphere. So you can see the way they span between the frontal lobe to the temporal lobes, connecting the two regions together. And of course, it's a long course that they need to run to be able to connect these two regions together. Then the next one is the cingulum tract. The cingulum tract, you see it wrapping around the corpus callosum, just as if you are tying a belt. So it wraps around it, connecting regions in the frontal lobe of the cerebrum hemisphere to the temporal lobe of the same cerebrum hemisphere, because we already said that they do not exit each cerebrum hemisphere. They are confined within each of the cerebrum hemisphere. Then the next one is the superior longitudinal tract, spanning between the frontal lobe to the occipital lobe, while some of the fibers even extend down to the temporal lobe. So you can see the way it runs. And we have the inferior longitudinal tract running from the temporal lobe down to the occipital lobe. Then the last one is the fronto-occipital tract. This is the fronto-occipital tract, highlighted in red. From the name, it means the span or the connect regions from the frontal lobe to the occipital lobe. So you can see that these long association fibers, of course, need to run through long distance within each of the cerebrum hemisphere. Then the last class of cerebral white matter that we have is the projection tract. So they connect the upper brain center to the lower brain center. You can see them radiating from regions of the cerebrum hemisphere down to the brainstem, or even going as far as the spinal cord. So they connect to and fro, and they can also be classified into two. You can have afferent fibers or you have efferent fibers. But the efferent fibers, they leave the higher center to go down, while the afferent are coming from the lower center to come up to the higher brain center. So, and a very good illustration of this is the corticospinal tract. If you check up the corticospinal tract, you see that fibers run from the cortex and they run down to the spinal cord. Clinical anatomy that I would like to highlight is agenesis of the corpus callosum, because we've said that the corpus callosum is the greatest commissural tract that we have. So it's good for us to use it as a point of target. When there is a genesis of corpus callosum, it means that there is a complete or partial failure of its development during the intrauterine life. This is a congenital abnormality. And we already said that they connect one cerebrum hemisphere to the other, and they need to be connected so that there will be synchronization of activities that occur within the right part of the body and also the left part of the body. And if this structure is absent, if it is not well developed, what do you think will now be the implication of this? This is definitely going to affect activities such as walking, reading, writing, and all activities that are being controlled by the cerebral cortex. So you can check our understanding of this lecture through the following question. The first one is, why is the inner region of the cerebrum hemisphere whitish in color? We should be able to provide answers to this in clear terms. The second question is to classify and explain the types of tract that is seen in the cerebral white matter. So thank you for your time. Let's meet again in our next class. Bye.